It's the Pain Exam Podcast with your host, David Rosenblum, MD. If you treat pain or have an interest in pain management, join us as we discuss painful disorders, alternative treatments, practice management, and more. Be sure to subscribe to the Pain Exam newsletter at painexam.com and review the podcast on Stitcher or iTunes. Our high-yield premium episodes are now available on the Pain Exam app with a premium subscription or access for free with a CME subscription at painexam.com. And now, without further ado, here's your host, Dr. Rosenblum.
Hello and welcome back. Thanks for joining me. Happy to be here in April of 2025. And we have some upcoming events. First of all, I have an ultrasound course May 17th in New York City. I also do ultrasound. Some of my team members do ultrasound IV training. So we offer that to anyone who's doing IVs and who's placing IVs and needs to use ultrasound for guidance because of difficult stick, etc. Ideal for nurses, etc., ICU, PAs, or docs in the hospital. Anyway, we also have great conferences coming up, starting with ASPN this summer, followed by Pain Week, Latin American Pain Society, New York, New Jersey Pain Congress, ACIP, of course, how could I forget ACIP, EPA, and much more. And in addition, I am having docs who are interested in a preceptorship shadow me when I do ultrasound blocks at the office. Some of my offices are high volume, so there's a chance to witness a lot of ultrasound blocks. There's also opportunities if you're interested in shadowing us for fluoro as well, fluoroscopy procedures. And just reach out to me via email if that's something you're interested in. Typically, if you choose to go the route of ultrasound preceptorship, you will also get a membership to the Virtual Pain Fellowship, which includes the online ultrasound course, regenerative medicine course, over 40 CMEs, and you get to spend the day with me. Anyway, so this podcast is not sponsored by any particular drug company. I'm not getting paid for this, but I do think, regardless of not in the interest of promoting any one particular drug, there is a new drug out there that has a new mechanism. It's in its own class, and you've probably heard of it, and your patients are probably asking you about it. The name is Suzetrigine, and it goes also by the name of Journavix, which maybe I'm not pronouncing right, so forgive me. It's a 50 milligram tablet, and I'm trying to figure out what the deal is with this drug. I'm sure you guys have had some questions. In fact, I just wrote my first script for it recently, and I'm still trying to sort this out. So I imagine in time, maybe I'll have more episodes dedicated to this. But this is also, it could be a board's question. If I was writing the pain boards, I would absolutely ask questions on this drug, the mechanism of action, side effects, etc., because it's a new class. So it's not about advertising one drug for one company. This is about discussing a new alternative that we have that is not an opiate, which is acute. So, what Jornavix? Well, basically, simply put, it's a drug that inhibits the NaV 1.8 receptor, or sodium V 1.8. Basically, in response to noxious stimuli, nociceptors in the peripheral nervous system generate action potentials that move along the nerve fiber. We all know this. To generate these action potentials, sodium ions enter the neuron through the voltage-gated sodium channels, or the NaV receptor. And basically, the NaV 1.8 is selectively expressed in peripheral nociceptive neurons, where its role is to transmit action potentials. It's not expressed in the human brain. That's why you're not seeing those CNS side effects as you do with opiates in the brain. That's one reason. So the drug blocks sodium ions from entering the pain-sensing neurons, disrupting the initiation and propagation of action potentials and reducing pain signal transmissions from the PNS and to the CNS. It's highly selective, and therefore it will inhibit pain signals transmissions to the spinal cord and brain from the periphery. NaV 1.8 is a target. It's a highly selective target, and so the drug will bind over 31,000 times more selectively here than other NaV subtypes, as measured in vitro. There's no mu receptor interaction, so this is not associated with addiction and has no addiction potential. And so for, at least at this point, of course, things could change in the future. You never know, but probably not. So what's the contraindications? Well, CYP3A inhibitors is a contraindication. And if you forgot what those are from medical school, the strong inhibitors of the CYP3A4 is ketoconazole, clarithromycin, ritonavir. The moderate inhibitors are fluconazole, erythromycin, verapamil. The weak inhibitors are rifampin, phenobarbital, and carbamazepine. I mean, this is a great boards question. I'll probably write a few about this, to be honest. Inducers, rifampin. It's a weak inhibitor, but it's also a strong inducer. Carbamazepine, phenytoin. Moderate is topiramate, modafinil, sulfin, pyrazone. Weak ones are erythromycin, nafcillin, and cimetidine. Okay, so this is something important when prescribing this drug. It sounds like it's a very safe drug overall. However, you don't want to have patients on these drugs at the same time, or you want to monitor them carefully. Other considerations, well, if they're on contraceptives. If they're on hormonal contraceptives while containing progestins other than levonorgestrel and norethindrone, you should use additional non-hormonal contraceptives such as condoms, okay, or alternative contraceptives during the Jornavix treatment and for 28 days after Jornavix is being used to avoid pregnancy. Risk of adverse reactions in patients with moderate and severe hepatic impairment. There is a higher systemic exposure of Suzetrigine and its metabolites than those with normal hepatic function. That may increase the risk of adverse events. So, pooled adverse reactions from trial 1 and 2 occurred in over 1% of patients, and at a greater rate than those treated with placebo were pruritus, muscle spasms, increased blood creatine phosphokinase, and rash. The safety profile of Journavix in trial 3 was consistent with that observed in trial 1 and 2. And the trials are on their website. So, when the patient is taking a CYP3A inhibitor, a reduced dose is recommended when co-administered with moderate CYP3A inhibitors. Avoid food or drinks containing grapefruit. Strong and moderate CYP3A inducers. Avoid concomitant use with Journavix with strong and moderate inducers. And there will be a reduced exposure of Suzetrigine and its active metabolite, which may result in reduced efficacy of the drug. How about CYP3A substrates? Well, my reference here is actually CYP3A4, so just keep that in mind. The substrates are alprazolam, atorvastatin, buspirone, carbamazepine, clarithromycin, cyclosporine, fentanyl, nifedipine, quinidine, and tacrolimus. Journavx website that I'm reading is not talking about the 4 subtype. It just says CYP3A, not CYP3A4. So keep in mind CYP3A4 is just a subtype of the CYP3A, so there are other drugs that you may need to consider holding when you're giving this medication. As far as pregnancy, there's no really specific available data at this time for drug-associated risk of major birth defects, miscarriage, adverse maternal or fetal outcomes, so I wouldn't use it at this point. Same thing with lactation. The development of health benefits of breastfeeding should be considered along with the mother's clinical need for the drug. When considering it as far as infertility, Journavx may reversibly impact the likelihood of females' reproductive potential to become pregnant while on treatment. Patients using contraceptives should continue to use contraceptives. Geriatrics, There doesn't seem to be any, based on the pharmacokinetic analysis in patients from 18 to 75, there does not seem to be any relevant impact. Of course, they didn't mention 90-year-olds or 95-year-olds, which I take care of quite a few of. Hepatic impairment, you need to lower the dose in patients with moderate hepatic impairment, which is Child-Pugh Class B. And avoid with severe Class C impairment. Avoid if the renal function is impaired or at eGFR of less than 15 milliliters per minute. So that's just a taste of the medication, and I think there are studies on the website showing how wonderful it is. And I'll briefly mention that in Phase 3 clinical results, it was demonstrated in 2 randomized double-blind placebo and hydrocodone-acetaminophen controlled trials of moderate to severe pain. And it was shown that in the abdominoplasty trial, the median time to over 2-point reduction in MPRS from baseline, MPRS is how they're measuring the pain, clinically meaningful pain relief. They mentioned 119 minutes for Journavix and 480 minutes for placebo. Median time to over 1-point reduction or perceptible pain relief was 34 minutes for those taking Journavix. In the bunionectomy trial, median time to over 2-point reduction was in the NPRS score was 240 minutes, and those taking placebo was 480 minutes. And the median time to over 1-point reduction NPRS perceptible pain relief was 60 minutes for those taking Journavix. And, they also mention that one of the other results here states that, I'm just summing it up, as far as when the question of superior reduction in moderate to severe acute pain versus placebo, they confirmed that in the second trial. And this was also the bunionectomy, but it did not meet the key secondary endpoint that hypothesized superior reduction in pain versus hydrocodone and acetaminophen combination. So the drug seems promising. My quick summary: it's not like the end all be all. It doesn't appear to, in this particular study, be superior to the hydrocodone. But if it's not addictive, if it's not an opiate, if there's no respiratory depression, and it treats pain, well, then it definitely has potential to be a vital tool in our arsenal. And moving to the abdominoplasty study, they said that Journavix met the primary endpoint by demonstrating statistically significant superior reduction in pain versus placebo, but it did not show superiority to the hydrocodone. So as long as this drug is truly safe and treats pain and we can get coverage for it, I imagine it's going to be used quite a bit, but who knows, maybe not. For now, it looks like it's really promising, and I guess the jury's still out since most of us have not really had the chance to use a lot of it yet. Now, as far as the dosing goes, well, they recommend twice daily oral dosing of the 50 milligram tablets. There's a loading dose of 2 tablets, so 100 milligrams, and then subsequent doses are only 1 tablet. And you may need to adjust for patients with hepatic impairment, as I mentioned earlier. You want to take it on an empty stomach at least 1 hour before or 2 hours after food to avoid delay of onset of action. Clear liquids may be consumed during this time: water, apple juice, vegetable broth, or black coffee. It may be taken with or without food after initial administration of the loading dose. Swallow, don't chew or crush, and avoid grapefruit juice. So I'll put a link to the packet insert. So before I sum this all up, I didn't really mention the indications and usage, which is probably one of the most important parts of this. So this sodium channel blocker is indicated for the treatment of moderate to severe acute pain. So at this time, that does not mean we're giving this to people forever. This is for acute pain. So keep that in mind. Of course, I'm thinking about this for my chronic pain patients who are acutely suffering and the opiates are not cutting it, or whatever the hell I'm giving them is not cutting it, and we don't want to give them opiates. So I do think this, if they didn't write the questions for this coming year yet, well, it will be there if the following year. How can this not be tested on the pain boards? I would definitely test it. I'm going to add questions about this to the pain exam board review. Once again, board prep season is here. For listening to the podcast, you can utilize a discount. PAINEDU is the coupon code, PAINEDU. You could sign up for the Pain Exam Board Prep, which is a question bank with lectures, or the Virtual Pain Fellowship, which includes that board prep, plus regenerative medicine on-demand course, plus the ultrasound on-demand course, TMJ, or maxillofacial pain ultrasound course, and much more. So missed keyword course is the much more, meaning people take the test, they email me what was asked if I missed it, and then I created a lecture about that. So that is there for you to use. Thanks for listening. Hope to see you at the conferences or my private ultrasound courses, or come hang out with me and we'll go over ultrasound all day long until you're sick of it. And I'll see you around. Take care and thanks for listening.
Dr. Rosenblum is here solely to educate, and you are solely responsible for all your decisions and actions in response to any information contained herein. These podcasts are not intended as a substitute for the medical advice of a physician to a particular patient or specific ailment. You should regularly consult a physician in matters relating to yours or another's health. You understand that this podcast is not intended as a substitute for consultation with a licensed medical professional. Copyright 2017, David Rosenblum, all rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, recording, or otherwise, without the prior written permission of the author.